The world didn't just tilt, it inverted, spun into a horrifying kaleidoscope of disbelief and terror. "Daddy?" Amara's voice, usually so bright and confident, was now a fragile, trembling whisper, lost in the sudden, chilling opulence of her parents' grand bedroom. An ear-splitting crash, a sound alien to the usually serene mansion, had ripped her from the depths of sleep, her heart hammering against her ribs as she'd raced to their side, fearing an accident, an intruder, anything but this. But the man who turned, her father, Chief Emeka Okoro, a man whose eyes usually held the warm, steady glow of paternal love, now regarded her with pupils constricted into points of malice, swimming in a sea of bloodshot sclera. His face, a canvas she knew better than her own, was contorted into a mask of disdainful fury. "What are you doing in my room, new house girl?" he thundered, his voice, once a comforting baritone that narrated bedtime stories and offered wise counsel, now boomed with the harshness of a stranger, each word a physical blow. "Have you completely lost your mind? Who in all of creation gave you the unmitigated audacity to breach the sanctity of my private chambers without so much as a by-your-leave knock?" Amara froze, a statue carved from pure shock, her breath caught in her throat, her limbs heavy as lead. This couldn't be her father. This cold, cruel man was an imposter. "Daddy," she managed again, the word feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. "It's me, Amara, your daughter, your morning star. You always called me." "Daughter?" he scoffed, a dry, rasping sound that scraped against her raw nerves, devoid of any warmth, any recognition. "My only daughter, the jewel of my eye, is Nkem." "You," he gestured dismissively, his eyes sweeping over her as if she were an unwelcome insect. "You are merely a piece of street refuse we charitably picked up. A stray. Don't you ever dare to address me with such familiarity again." To Amara's escalating, suffocating horror, her mother, Dr. Ada Okoro, the woman whose embrace was her safest harbor, whose gentle hands had soothed countless childhood fevers and fears, now stood beside her husband, a silent effigy of agreement. Her usually warm, compassionate eyes, the ones that mirrored Amara's own, were now icy and distant, reflecting only the cold fury of her husband. She nodded, a sharp, definitive movement that drove a shard of ice straight into Amara's heart. Tears, hot and stinging, finally breached the dam of Amara's disbelief, streaming down her face, blurring the monstrous tableau before her. She looked from one beloved parent to the other, her gaze pleading, desperately searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint that this was some elaborate, cruel jest. But their faces remained hard, impassive masks of granite. She felt a terrifying disconnect, as if the loving parents she'd known her entire life had been hollowed out and replaced by these cold, unfeeling automatons. Her gaze, desperate for an anchor in this maelstrom of madness, fell upon Nkem, their long-standing maid, who now hovered near the grand mahogany doorway. Nkem, who had arrived as a frightened teenager with nowhere else to go, whom her parents had sheltered, educated, and treated almost as an elder daughter. But the Nkem who met her eyes now was a stranger. A chilling, triumphant smirk played on her lips, her eyes glinting with a deeply unsettling, malevolent light. "You haven't seen anything yet, little princess," Ning hissed, her voice a low, venomous drawl that dripped with years of concealed bitterness. She sauntered further into the room, her posture exuding an uncharacteristic confidence, a predatory grace. She threatened to have Amara cast out onto the streets, penniless and alone, if she didn't immediately accept her new, debased role. As Nkem turned and walked away, swaying her hips with an air of newfound dominion, she relished every nuance of the profound confusion and shattering heartbreak so clearly etched on Amara's beautiful face. The world had finally been remade to her liking. This sudden, nightmarish transformation, this inversion of love into inexplicable hatred, was not a spontaneous eruption of madness. It was the culmination of a dark seed planted and nurtured in the fertile ground of envy. Only the previous evening, Nkem, her soul corroded by years of silent, gnawing jealousy, had embarked on a desperate, damnable quest. For over 2 decades, she had been a fixture in the Okoro mansion, a silent witness to their joys, their successes, their boundless love for their only child, Amara. Chief Emeka and Dr. Ada had been more than employers. They had been benefactors, saviors who had plucked her from the precipice of destitution, offering her not just food and shelter, but also dignity and an education that far surpassed any dream her younger self could have conjured. They had paid her way through university, celebrated her small successes, and included her in family moments. But for Nkem, it was never enough. The very air Amara breathed seemed to be perfumed with a golden light Nkem could only observe from the shadows. Amara, at 18, was everything Nkem felt she was not: effortlessly beautiful, incandescently intelligent, and, most painfully, the undisputed center of her parents' universe. Every loving glance, every proud word, every casual caress bestowed upon Amara was, to Nkem, a personal affront, a reminder of her own perceived inadequacy, her otherness. What began as a wistful, almost sorrowful admiration for the girl, the graceful way Amara carried herself, the melodic cadence of her laughter, the unwavering adoration in her parents' eyes, slowly, insidiously, curdled. Resentment took root, its tendrils wrapping around Nkem's heart, squeezing out gratitude and replacing it with a bitter, all-consuming envy. "Am I not good enough?" she would whisper to her reflection in the dead of night, her face a mask of anguish. "Haven't I been loyal? Haven't I served them faithfully, tirelessly? Why does she possess everything, effortlessly, while I must strive and still remain in the periphery? Why can't they see me, the real me, the one who yearns for just a fraction of that unconditional love?" The questions became a relentless, tormenting litany. And so, under the carefully constructed guise of visiting an old friend who had supposedly just welcomed a new baby, Nkem had sought out a different kind of deliverance. Her journey took her far from the manicured lawns of the Okoro estate to the shadowy outskirts of the bustling city of Akka, to a place whispered about in hushed, fearful tones, the secluded shrine of Mazi Ekwensu. He was a dibia of ill repute, a sorcerer some claimed had cheated death itself, returning with powers both terrifying and potent. His dwelling was hidden deep within a gnarled, ancient forest, a place where the sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, and the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something acrid, primal, and profoundly unsettling. Only the truly desperate, or the truly wicked, dared to seek him out. Nkem, her heart a cold stone of resolve in her chest, pushed her way through the grasping undergrowth, her borrowed wrapper catching on thorns, until she reached the clearing. Mazi Ekwensu, a figure as gnarled and ancient as the trees surrounding him, with eyes like chips of obsidian that seemed to peer into the darkest recesses of her soul, greeted her with a knowing, unsettling calm. "Who seeks that which is forbidden?" his voice rasped, like stones grinding together. "I do," Nkem replied, kneeling, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Nkem, daughter of no one significant, I want what my heart can no longer bear to lack." "Speak it plainly, child of shadow," Mazi Ekwensu commanded. Bowing her head lower, Nkem voiced her venomous desire. "I want Chief Okoro and his wife, Ada, to love me, only me, with the intensity they now reserve for their daughter, Amara. I want their hearts to turn away from her, to regard her with a passion of hatred as strong as their current love. I want them to see me as their true daughter, their cherished heir, whilst let her become the maid. No, worse, let her serve me. Let her taste the dregs of the life I have endured." Mazi Ekwensu listened, his expression unreadable. He asked what perceived wrong the young girl, Amara, had done to her to deserve such a fate. Nkem, in her bitter jealousy, had no rational answer, only the burning injustice she felt. He agreed to weave his dark magic, but on one immutable condition. His debt must be paid in full, exactly 1 year from the granting of her wish. Nkem, blinded by her all-consuming desire, readily agreed. The air grew thick with incantations in a language she did not know but which resonated with a terrifying power. Symbols were drawn in the dust, and a small, unseen creature let out a final, pitiful shriek that echoed in the oppressive silence. He then dismissed her with a curt nod. She had returned to the Okoro mansion late that evening, initially seething with an impatient fury when it appeared the charm had failed. Her parents had greeted her with their usual kindness, Dr. Ada reminding her about dinner preparations. But the Dibbia's magic, like a slow-acting poison, had merely bided its time, waiting for the witching hour, for the precise stroke of 12:03 a.m., to unleash its terrible power and irrevocably twist the fabric of their reality. And so, Amara's descent into a living hell began from that catastrophic moment in her parents' room. The Grand Okoro mansion, once a haven of love and laughter, transformed into a bewildering prison. Nkem, the maid, overnight became the golden child, the princess, upon whom all affection was lavished. Amara, the cherished daughter, was stripped of her identity, her dignity, her very name, becoming less than a ghost in her own home. She was the help, the new house girl, an object of scorn and irritation. The days that followed were a blur of grueling labor and relentless emotional torture. She was forced to undertake all the tasks Nkem had once performed. Her soft hands, accustomed to books and paintbrushes, now raw from scrubbing floors, washing mountains of dishes, and cleaning toilets. She served meals to Nkem, who now sat imperiously at the head of the magnificent dining table, in Amara's mother's customary chair, draped in Amara's clothes, basking in the stolen glory and the adoring gazes of Chief Emeka and Dr. Ada. "Nkem, my princess, you look radiant today," Chief Okoro would boom, his eyes filled with a doting fondness that Amara yearned for with every fiber of her being. Doctor Ada would embrace Nkem tightly each morning, murmuring how proud she was, how Nkem was the daughter she had always dreamed of. Meanwhile, Amara, the girl whose academic achievements had once been celebrated in newspaper articles, whose future blazed with scholarship offers, was addressed with contempt. Whenever she gathered the courage to whisper the truth, to plead for recognition, "Mama, Papa, it's me, Amara, don't you remember?" her words were met with a chilling indifference, or, worse, a sharp slap across the face, followed by a venomous warning that if she dared to persist in her delusional claims, she would be unceremoniously thrown out onto the streets. "Your insolence is astounding, girl," her father would often roar. "If it weren't for Nkem's kind heart, her pleas for us to show you some charity, you would have been long gone from this house, back to the gutters where you belong." Each such utterance was a fresh dagger plunged into Amara's already fractured heart. To see her loving parents transformed into these cruel, unfeeling strangers, to witness them fawning over the very architect of her misery, was a torment beyond words. The entire household staff, cowed by the chief's sudden, inexplicable shift in demeanor and Nkem's newfound authority, quickly adapted. They saw Amara as the maid, their interactions with her tinged with a mixture of pity they dared not express and a fear-driven deference to Nkem, who was now, for all intents and purposes, their young mistress. Nkem, for her part, reveled in her elevated status, seizing every opportunity to underscore Amara's degradation. She would deliberately spill food for Amara to clean, demand impossible tasks, and mock her former little sister with a sadistic glee. Amara, terrified of being cast out, of losing the last tenuous connection to the life and family she knew, endured it all with a stoic silence, her spirit battered but not entirely broken. Deep within her, a tiny ember of hope flickered, a desperate, perhaps foolish, belief that one day, somehow, her parents would awaken from this inexplicable nightmare and see her, truly see her, as their daughter once more. One particularly bleak morning, the heavens opened, unleashing a torrential downpour that mirrored the tempest in Amara's soul. She lay in her small, damp room in the servants' quarters, her body racked with fever, the relentless emotional and physical strain of the preceding weeks finally taking its toll. Nkem, rising late and finding Amara absent from her morning duties, stormed into the room, her face a mask of fury. So the little queen decides to sleep in, does she? Nkem shrieked, her voice cutting through Amara's feverish haze. You lazy, ungrateful pig, get up from that bed this instant. Before Amara could even attempt to explain, Nkem grabbed her by the handful of her hair, yanking her brutally from the thin mattress onto the cold, unforgiving tiled floor. Amara cried out, a small, wounded sound, her fevered body trembling uncontrollably. Her throat was too dry, too constricted by pain and fear, to form coherent words. Please, she managed to whisper, her voice raspy. I'm not feeling well. Nkem merely laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Not feeling well? In this mansion, with all the free food you consume, the roof over your head that you do nothing to earn, such indulgence. Stand up this instant before I decide to scald you with boiling water. Without waiting for a response, she seized Amara by the arm, her fingers digging into Amara's flesh like talons, and dragged her, stumbling and weak, out of the room, through the corridors, and towards the back garden. There, with a vicious shove, she thrust Amara out into the merciless, driving rain. The thunder roared like an angered beast, the lightning splitting the bruised sky with jagged, ephemeral scars. Nkem, her face alight with a cruel satisfaction, forced Amara to her knees on the muddy ground, right in the open compound, exposed to the full fury of the pelting storm. Kneel there! Nkem commanded, her voice rising above the din of the elements. And raise your hands. Perhaps the heavens will wash some of the filth from your wretched soul. Please, Nkem, please, I'm sick. I beg you, Amara gasped, raindrops mingling with the hot tears coursing down her cheeks. Nkem merely spat on the ground beside her, her expression one of utter contempt. This is where you belong, gutter snipe. Filth like you doesn't deserve the comfort of shelter. She turned on her heel, a triumphant, wicked smile spreading from ear to ear as she walked back into the warmth and dryness of the grand mansion, leaving Amara to the mercy of the raging storm. Inside, she found Chief Emeka and Dr. Ada seated comfortably at the breakfast table, leisurely enjoying their hot pap and akara, the rhythmic pounding of the rain on the reinforced glass windows of their opulent dining room, serving as a mere backdrop to their morning repast. Good morning, Mommy. Good morning, Daddy, Nkem chirped, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness as she approached them. Dr. Ada smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Good morning, my darling Nkem. You're looking particularly lovely today. I do hope that ungrateful, lazy girl is finally learning her place in this household. She needs a firm hand. Nkem chuckled, a light, airy sound that belied the darkness in her heart, as she took her seat at the table and casually reached for a piece of freshly baked bread. Oh, she is, Mommy. She's outside, kneeling under the rain. A little penance. I caught her still asleep in her bed when she was supposed to be cleaning the entire ground floor. Chief Okoro grunted, not even bothering to look up from his newspaper, his voice devoid of any compassion. Good, that's precisely what she deserves. We've been far too lenient with her, allowing her to harbor these delusions of grandeur. It's high time we established clear boundaries, so she doesn't get any more foolish ideas in her head. Exactly, my dear husband, Dr. Ada added, nodding sagely. Let her kneel out there until she understands, truly understands, that she is not, and never will be, a part of this family. A little hardship will build character, or at least obedience. Hours later, when the storm had finally exhausted its fury, leaving behind a bruised and weeping sky, Nkem, with a sigh of performative reluctance, led a shivering, soaked to the bone Amara back into the house. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Her lips were blue, but Nkem showed no flicker of concern. Instead, she immediately ordered Amara to clear the breakfast table and wash all the dishes piled high in the kitchen, adding a cruel warning. And if I find so much as a single drop of water spilled on this floor, you will be spending the night in the dog cage with Rex. Perhaps his company will be more to your liking. Amara, summoning the last vestiges of her strength, forced her trembling limbs towards the kitchen. The thought of the cold, damp dog cage spurred her on. She knew she had to avoid it at all costs. As she began to mechanically scrub the pots, a new wave of misery washed over her. She felt a familiar, unwelcome trickle down her thighs. Her monthly visitor had arrived, unannounced and at the most inopportune moment. She had to get to her room to find a sanitary pad. As she stood in her small, bleak room, fumbling for the pads she kept hidden under her mattress, the door was flung open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Nkem stood framed in the doorway, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Spotting the packet of pads in Amara's hand, she lunged forward and snatched them away. "What do you think you're doing? Wasting precious resources on yourself?" Amara stood there, mute and humiliated, as Nkem proceeded to confiscate every last pad Amara possessed, tossing them into a basket with a dismissive sneer. "You can use rags, like the common street girl you are," Nkem declared, "or old newspapers. It's more befitting your station." But Nkem's capacity for cruelty seemed boundless. Later that day, to inflict maximum humiliation, she deliberately smeared red paint on Chief Okoro's favorite antique armchair, a cherished heirloom, and then dragged Amara before her enraged father, vociferously claiming that Amara had defiantly sat on the chair and stained it with her filthy menstrual blood. Chief Okoro, upon seeing the stain, exploded in a torrent of rage. "You disgusting, filthy pig," he roared, his face puce with fury. "How dare you defile my favorite chair with your uncleanness? Have you no shame? No fear?" And with that, he struck Amara hard across the face, the force of the blow sending her staggering backwards, her cheek stinging, her ear ringing. Amara stood there, utterly broken, the salty taste of blood mingling with her tears. It was the first time in her entire life that her father had ever laid a hand on her in anger. The pure, unadulterated hatred she saw blazing in his eyes was a new, devastating wound, a confirmation that the father she loved was truly gone, replaced by this monstrous stranger. She looked towards her mother, a silent, desperate appeal in her eyes, hoping for a sliver of maternal compassion, a sign that some part of her mother still remembered, still cared. But Dr. Ada merely turned away, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line, her eyes cold and dismissive. The following day, Amara was forced to witness another heart-wrenching spectacle. Her parents, beaming with affection, presented Nkem with an array of lavish gifts, expensive perfumes whose scents Amara once loved, designer handbags, elegant shoes, and, the cruelest cut of all, the latest, most coveted smartphone. It was the exact model Amara had been dreaming of, begging her parents for months, only to be repeatedly told it was too expensive, an unnecessary extravagance for a girl her age. Now, this very phone was being unwrapped by Nkem, who shrieked with delight, feigning the surprise of a pampered princess. "Oh, Mommy, Daddy, thank you so much. It's just what I wanted," Nkem cried, throwing her arms around Dr. Ada, who laughed and kissed her soundly on the cheek. "You deserve this and so much more, my darling, my true daughter," Dr. Ada cooed lovingly, her eyes shining with adoration for Nkem. Nkem, over her mother's shoulder, caught Amara's eye and offered a small, triumphant, utterly malicious smile, savoring the visible pain and desolation in Amara's gaze. Amara felt her heart sink to the depths of her shoes,